As humans, we have a psychological need for social connection, to feel valued and to belong. We gravitate to environments where we see others who look like us and where we feel like we can bring our whole selves. The extent to which we feel seen, connected, included, and valued in a community, our sense of belonging, impacts how we form a professional identity, our professional development, and our career progression. It is influenced by cultural and structural factors and enhanced by our ability to develop meaningful relationships. An important vehicle for developing relationships and for creating inclusive environments where all members of the community experience a sense of belonging is storytelling. There's immense power in sharing stories, telling our own stories and receiving other stories, both personal and collective narratives. In this session, we'll share stories of belonging and inclusion. And I'll start with one of my own, and then I'll invite our panelists to share theirs. As a high school student in a predominantly white exam school, I was typically the only Black in my classes, and I became accustomed to outsider status, irrespective of the context or subject matter. Outsider status in one subject in particular ended up setting a course for my career. In my chemistry class, women were ignored and made to feel like chemistry was not for them. So to some extent, I pursued a bachelor's in chemistry to prove my male chemistry teacher and others wrong. During my senior year of high school, I took general chemistry at Xavier University of Louisiana, excelled, and then served as a tutor. At Xavier, the nation's only historically Black and Catholic university, I experienced a sense of belonging that eluded me in high school. Xavier, founded in 1925 by the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament, stays true to its founding mission of serving the underrepresented Black population and the promotion of a more just and humane society. It touts its winning formula as providing students with a well-balanced curriculum and an environment that nurtures their intellect and feeds their souls. Like other historically Black colleges and universities, Xavier serves as a model of Black excellence through a supportive culture that trains for success and develops leaders. For me, being surrounded by others who looked like me and shared my cultural background, and being in a supportive environment with high expectations for success fostered a sense of belonging. I contrast that experience to my experience in graduate school. When armed with a chemistry degree, I was the first African-American admitted to the graduate program in chemical engineering at Rice. As is generally the case for members of underrepresented groups in higher education, I entered a space that was not meant or prepared for me. In solo status, as a first, and as one coming from a different background and lacking role models, I learned to be resourceful and to adapt, seeking ways to connect over the science by focusing on shared scientific goals. I became acutely sensitized to marginalization created by being othered, particularly as this relates to the student experience. I'll share a short story of my acting on that sensitivity from the time when I was on sabbatical leave at Georgia Tech, in residence at the Institute for Bioengineering and Bioscience and the Biomedical Engineering Department. I was the only Black female faculty member at the time, and female students, especially women of color, flocked to my office to meet me and to be counseled and mentored. There was a line outside my door on a regular basis, to the point where I decided I needed to create a group initiative, and that I did. I created group sessions held over lunch and sometimes over dinner for sharing stories and also for self-education and empowerment. We as a group of women of color explored the literature, problem solved, and challenged one another to act on our learnings. Eventually, I held focus groups co-led by me and a psychology professor collaborator, where we delved into factors influencing science identity formation for women of color. We published the results of our study in the journal Science Education. And now, as president of Olin College, I lead an institution that has storytelling as a rich tradition. At Olin, we see ourselves as a cause, not just a college, dedicated to educational transformation and public good. We achieve our mission through team-focused learning tied to solving real-world problems. Faculty and students see themselves as collaborators in learning. And starting with the admissions process, the whole community uses storytelling as a vehicle for forming and changing communities. Our goal is to transform engineering education by partnering with our students and other organizations to explore, develop, and share new educational approaches and environments that realize our vision of a world in which engineering is for everyone. Crucially, we deliberately create a sense of belonging for everyone at the college so that students, faculty, and staff all see themselves as vital members of a learning community. A sense of belonging is a basic need that we all share. And I'll end with a quote on belonging by Bell Hooks. We can restore hope in a world that transcends race by building communities where self-esteem comes not from feeling superior to any group, but from one's relationship to the land, to the people, to the place, wherever that may be.
I guess I can go ahead and just jump into my story. So where can I start? So basically, I was born and raised in the metro Atlanta area. And for those who don't know, Atlanta has a population that is majority Black. So me growing up, I was already accustomed to seeing, Black doctors or Black entrepreneurs or Black teachers. So, that sense of belonging just, in the city or in my environment, it just felt natural and normal to me just to see, successful Black people. And I know that's kind of rare for, other people or Black people around the country, but that was my immediate experience. And then, yeah, so led me to go to Georgia State University. So there at Georgia State University, I was studying marketing, but I had a passion for, music. So I played on the football team my first year, was a music producer, and I was DJing on campus. And I was like, okay, I want to be the biggest DJ or music producer in Atlanta, right? So what's going to make me, elevate my music type of career? So I joined the student board. So I thought that if I DJ all the events on campus, then everybody would know me, right? On the student programming board at Georgia State, and basically I was on the homecoming, planning homecoming. I'm like, I don't know anything about events, but that allowed me to create my first, or plan my first event. So it was a big event, and I think 800 people came out. I'm like, oh, this is awesome. I like planning events. So I wanted to go ahead and just add on just a minor, in hospitality. And okay, I think that my career is going to go towards events, right? So, started planning events on campus, and then that led me to, even have more passion about if I like events, I think everybody likes events. And that allowed me to create my first startup company. So my first startup company, it was called Event Kit. So basically, it was a mobile app so you can see how a live event looks before you go to it. And my background was in marketing and entertainment and music and things of that sort. So I didn't know anything about the tech world, right? So, we ended up, going to Georgia State. We won a pitch competition. We were winning different pitch competitions in the city and outside the city. And we won one pitch competition at this place here in Atlanta called Atlanta Tech Village. So it's the fourth largest tech hub in the US, has some awesome companies that came out of there. You're probably familiar with Calendly. They were a company out there, Sales Loft, a lot of other companies in Atlanta started there. So we won free space there, and we were working out there. And the first thing I stepped into, me and my co-founder, we, well, I was black, my co-founder was black, we met playing football on the team, so everybody was black, or we had Asian people on our team, we had some people that's LGBTQ as well. And we walked into Atlanta Tech Village and immediately noticed that we were the only black people like in the building. It was like I could literally count the number of black people on my hand who were like, building a startup. So it's literally like the typical kind of tech bros type of environment. If you don't know what that is, it's kind of young college white kids, guys, with polo shirts on, just kind of walking around. So that's kind of what the environment was. And I immediately was like, it was new to me. I think this was the first time, in my career journey, or just like within my life, I kind of just felt like a sense of like they didn't belong, because I was like, one of the youngest there, and one of the black people in the building of like 300 members. So it was just like a weird feeling, and I was like, okay, I'm going to change this. I didn't know how exactly I wanted to change, at Atlanta Tech Village, or just make my step up. I was like, I kind of just smiled and was like, okay, I'm going to change this. So like, even if, the clothes that I wear a hat backwards or whatever it was, like I told myself I was going to be authentically me, and I'm not going to change that for anybody.
Our assignment last week was to think about times when we were an only. So like, for example, the only woman in a room. And, at first that was the one that jumped into my head, because I'm like, yeah, I've been in rooms with all engineering faculty and just me many, many, many times. But there were other ways that I was also the only. So I was also very often, the only non-engineer, the only social scientist, the only non-tenure track faculty member in a room, the only person back then who might have been under 40, the only mom in the room. So all these pieces of my identity that came up. And, in academia, we have this imaginary totem pole of people on this hierarchy. And, it's spoken or unspoken. Everybody knows where you fall if you're on the professional track instead of the tenure track. And some of this has to do with the history of engineering and, being a very traditionally masculine profession. So all of those experiences, like over time, they made me feel less than in some ways. And oftentimes I'd be less apt to speak out, less apt to share my opinion. And then these little slights would happen that I would often wonder, is it because I'm a woman? Is it because I'm younger? Is it because I'm non-tenure track? For example, there were times that my colleague, the director of the Leonard Center, Tom Litzinger, who's retiring at the end of May, we would be going to a department and the itinerary would say Dr. Tom Litzinger and Ms. Sarah Zappe. And I'm like, why am I Dr. too? Now, Tom was very awesome. He was quick to correct those examples when that happened, but they happened frequently, definitely multiple times over the years. Or students, when I teach, they would very often call me Mrs. Zappe, Miss Zappe, which was my favorite. I didn't really like that one, instead of professor or doctor. I don't know how much that happens to men, but as teaching undergrads, it happens all the time for women. There was also one experience at our advisory board. One of our advisory board members, who was an older gentleman, at the end of the meeting, he handed me his handwritten notes and asked me to type them up for him before the next morning. I was like, I don't want to type up your notes. So yes, I did not. I think I asked our administrative assistant to do it, but it was like, again, one of those things. And over time, these little things kind of add up and they get to you. I was in a session all about creativity, and creativity is something that I'm really interested in, really passionate about. And I do have expertise in this area. I actually just finished writing a book chapter with some awesome colleagues on creativity and entrepreneurship and leadership. If not published yet, it's still in draft form. But so this is something that I'm passionate about, that I'm interested in. I was excited. I'm in this session and we go to breakout rooms. And, randomly I am put into a breakout room with 3 white men. So there's 4 of us in there. And the activity was to take, whatever the concept of creativity they were talking about and relate it to our field, relate it to our teaching. And so the first thing we do in the breakout groups is we introduce ourselves, tell a little bit of our background. And, I'm still really happy and excited to be there. And then after all the introductions, one of our gentlemen in the room said, "Oh, wow, the three of us all teach engineering design. We should talk about that course and this." And then he turned, well, he didn't turn because we're in a virtual room, but he says to me, "Sorry, Sarah," and then just moves on. And so I'm sitting there and I was like, what the heck? And I am not a confrontational person. The stakes for this were not high. So I was like, I'm not going to confront it. But you can imagine what probably happened to my body language. I said not a single other word during the breakout session. I was probably super slumped down. Actually, I know I was super slumped down. And I was just angry. I was so mad. And, I moved on. And of course, I thought the one good thing about this is now I have a story to tell about belonging. And I remember at some point I was going to share this. So when I was asked to do this, it was the first thing that came into my head. But what I want you to think about, and there are probably many of you in the room that may have never thought about times that you were an only, or maybe you don't often experience being an only often, but think about that. I feel like we need to have self-awareness of who is in the room and really think about how to include them. So, I can't, my experiences have been sporadic. They're not a daily thing, but think of our colleagues who might be people of color, people with different gender identities, who might have different sexual identities. They might experience this feeling on a daily basis. So that's my challenge to the room, to do this, to really think about who's in the room and how they might feel.
When I think about belonging, I definitely think about it in terms of this essential need, to feel accepted for our unique and authentic selves. And as an educator, I think the power of belonging is really a gateway to innovation. I've seen firsthand how, when people feel like they belong, they almost unlock their superpowered potential, if you will, especially in the context of young innovators. I'm reminded of a student from a couple of years ago whose family immigrated to the US from Ethiopia when he was very young. I think he was about 5. And as he tells his story, he had a very diverse high school with just a rich cultural experience. One of my favorite stories is when he shares, walking around the cafeteria and being greeted by just the delicious aromas from foods from all over the world. After he finished high school, he came to Madison University, which was less diverse. In his high school, he often would describe, his peers' names sort of seemed to sample the world over. And in our department, he felt somehow his name was different or perceived as different. In his second or third year, he became really connected with an amazing group of what I think there's a couple folks in the audience that are part of, and that's the University Innovation Fellows community. He was a really natural leader, an innovator, a change maker, both I think on our campus and really nationally. Here on our campus, he helped do things like launch our first university-wide hackathon with his leadership circle and created new opportunities for students through a university-wide makerspace we have on campus called the X Labs. Incidentally, he also joined our leadership program here in the department, where he peer mentored other students and shared his stories. What's powerful about the student's story in part is, from an educator's perspective, these were programs that I think were intentionally designed to foster community, and I think helped him unlock some of his many superpowers. And I think the student would describe and talk about that kind of personal transformation using actually some of the same language I've heard to describe our VentureWell community. Things like finding your people, so to speak, finding those that are like-minded in the pursuit of new ideas for making a positive impact in the world. I think his story is also exemplar of someone who finds the power of belonging in several different communities, and how finding belonging can really support, again, our young innovators that we're teaching in our classrooms and our co-curricular spaces. I wanted to share another story about an alumni who I recently interviewed for a podcast. And I think her story is such a great example of someone who actually helps create space that facilitates belonging, which I would say, for a young professional is especially tricky and challenging. So she had recently graduated from our program and had been working for about a half a year in one of the largest tech firms in the world. And she was really wrestling with questions about how to navigate interactions at customer sites with different corporate cultures and values. She started connecting with others, people that were her colleagues, who then became her friends, as she told the story. And after a lot of conversations, they created an employee resource group for the LGBTIQ plus community, where employees could have these really authentic conversations about the things they were encountering and things they were seeing and things that they were really struggling with. I really loved her story because, here we have someone just starting out in their career and seeing a challenge connected to belonging, feeling excluded from a dominant group, and then just doing something about it to create the space, invite people in, and to have those connections and conversations. I know that just like students and faculty at times can feel challenged at like You Belong. And I would say, especially in the context of innovation and invention education, often we're located in maybe conventionally minded, sometimes rigid professional context where it can be tricky to feel like you belong as an innovator. And being an innovator in and of itself can often feel like a lonely place. And I've also noticed this in our students. I think many of them share the same DNA, so to speak, of having this entrepreneurial spirit and feel challenged maybe by the sluggishness of some of our conventional higher education approaches and opportunities. One thing that strikes me, from the stories I mentioned, is that the breakthrough in belonging is almost never accidental. And actually, several of our panelists sort of mentioned this. It's almost always intentional. So I think, again, as educators, we have the power to help cultivate and create the space where belonging can happen, and then authentically invite and seek out students into those spaces. I'll close with this. I think we all know that the tailwinds of privilege helps power success, and importantly, take risks. And I think risk taking is this essential component of belonging. It's scary at times to share yourself, your authentic self, for fear of rejection. But I think an important job we have as educators is to help to create this really ecosystem of intentional spaces for our students that facilitates the connection making, finding our people, as it were, or inviting more of us into a community that supports risk taking and bold innovation.